When a narcissist hurts you, they're not thinking about your pain, they're calculating their power, and the most unsettling part, the moment you start to heal is the moment they start to lose control. When someone hurts you deeply, emotionally, psychologically, you expect, or at least hope, that on some level they'll reflect on it, that they'll feel the weight of it, that they'll maybe even sit with the discomfort of knowing they've caused real harm. But when you're dealing with a narcissist, what actually happens is almost the complete opposite. It's disorienting. You're sitting there in pain, feeling cracked open and raw, and they're not even thinking about you. They're thinking about themselves every time. See, after they hurt you, the first thought that runs through their mind isn't, "Did I go too far?" or "How is she feeling?" It's, "How does this affect me?" And that's hard to stomach because you want to believe that your pain means something to them, that it matters, that it registers. But for someone with narcissistic tendencies, or for someone deeply rooted in narcissistic patterns, your pain is secondary. At best, at worst, it's a nuisance, an inconvenience, a disruption to the image they've carefully constructed of themselves. What's happening inside them in that moment is not guilt, it's not shame. It's not that pang of remorse that makes the rest of us call a friend and say, "I messed up. I need to own this." No, what they feel is irritation, maybe even indignation, because now you're reacting. You're upset, you're withdrawn, or you're confronting them, and that means their control over the situation is no longer intact. That's what they're focusing on, the loss of control, the shift in dynamics. The fact that you're now a variable they can't immediately manage, and for them, that's threatening. What's wild is that you can be in the middle of an emotional storm, crying, shaking, trying to make sense of what just happened, and they're watching you with detachment, maybe even with quiet frustration, thinking, "Why is she making such a big deal out of this?" Because from their point of view, they didn't do anything wrong, or if they did, it wasn't that bad, and if it was, well, you probably deserved it. That's the internal math they're doing. They're not weighing your feelings. They're not measuring the impact. They're calculating how your reaction is going to affect their day, their image, their grip on the situation, and you start to wonder if you're asking for too much, if you're being too sensitive. Because they're so calm, so composed, maybe even cold, and in that moment you start turning your pain inward. You start questioning your own instincts. That's how powerful their detachment can be. It can make you abandon your own emotional reality. The truth is, narcissists are profoundly self-referencing. Everything that happens, even the things they cause, get filtered through a "how does this make me look? How does this affect my comfort? What do I need right now?" lens. And so your hurt doesn't stop them in their tracks. It doesn't pierce through. It doesn't become a moment of reckoning for them. It becomes a moment of inconvenience, something to silence, something to spin, something to survive. And sometimes, if they sense they're losing their grip on you, if they see that your pain is turning into distance or clarity or resolve, they'll suddenly become very interested. They'll reach out, say something that sounds like concern. Maybe they'll text, "Are you okay?" But it's not coming from a place of empathy. It's not rooted in a desire to understand the impact of their actions. It's damage control. It's a quick check-in to see whether you're still under their emotional influence. And if you answer, if you come back, if you explain, if you soften, they'll register that as a win. Not a moment of connection, a win, because now they know you're still reachable. You're still swayed by the illusion of their care. And that's what they wanted to know all along. We have this hope, especially those of us who lead with empathy, that people will reflect, that they'll grow, that hurting someone will bother them, push them to evolve, or at least prompt an apology that feels real. But with a narcissist, that cycle almost never completes. Their attention doesn't stay with the damage they caused. It pivots immediately back to how they're being perceived, how the situation can be managed, how they can protect the narrative where they're still the good guy, and that's the hardest part for many people to accept. Because when you love someone, when you've invested in them, when you've made room for them in your life, it's devastating to realize they're not making the same room for your feelings in theirs. It can feel like you're grieving someone who's still standing right in front of you. And you are. You're grieving the person you thought they were, the one you believed would care when it counted. And it's not just about emotional capacity. It's about emotional willingness. It takes willingness to sit in discomfort. To say, I hurt you and I need to own that. But for a narcissist, discomfort is something to escape, to blame, shift, to rationalize away. So instead of looking at you and thinking, I hurt her, they're thinking she's overreacting, or worse, she's trying to make me feel bad. If you've ever sat in the wreckage of a moment like that, waiting for them to meet you in the truth of what happened, and they just don't, that silence isn't absence. It's strategy. It's their way of preserving their ego at the expense of your reality. They're not thinking about what they did. They're thinking about how to keep you from talking about it again, and that is the most painful kind of invisibility. It's a strange thing, watching someone hurt you and then somehow make themselves the victim in the process. That's the kind of mental gymnastics narcissists are masters at. When they've done something cruel, dismissive, or manipulative, they don't sit with the consequences of that action the way most people do. They don't get quiet and reflective and think, okay, I crossed a line, I need to take responsibility. No. What they do is tell themselves a story where they were justified, where they were pushed, where they had no choice. And if you've ever confronted one about something they did that hurt you, you've seen this firsthand. Watch how fast they flip the script. One moment, you're explaining your pain, hoping to be heard, and the next, they're defending, deflecting, and accusing. Suddenly, you're not talking about what they did. You're defending your reaction. The conversation turns not into a moment of resolution, but into a courtroom where you're on trial for expressing hurt. That's how deep their self-protective narrative goes. When they hurt you, they don't process it the way a person grounded in empathy would. They don't think, wow, I shouldn't have said that. They think she was being too sensitive, or he was being dramatic, or they made me do it. And that's how they keep themselves blameless. They rewrite the event in real time in their head, spinning it in such a way that they remain the reasonable one, the misunderstood one, the real victim. And let me be clear, this isn't always a loud or dramatic retelling. Sometimes it's quiet, internal, subtle, but it's powerful, because once that narrative is formed, it becomes almost impossible for them to see your pain as valid. They might say they're sorry, but only in a way that protects their self-image. I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm sorry if you took it the wrong way. That's not ownership. That's avoidance. That's them maintaining a version of the story where they're not actually the one who caused the hurt. They're just the one caught up in your emotional overreaction. And the most painful part, if you stay in that dynamic long enough, you start to believe it. You start to internalize the version of events they keep feeding you. You start to think, maybe I did make too big a deal of it. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I should have handled it differently. That's the erosion. That's the damage. It's not just the original wound. It's the slow, silent rewriting of reality that follows, because what they are doing, whether they know it or not, is protecting their ego at all costs. They cannot tolerate the idea that they're flawed in that way, that they caused harm, that they messed up. So instead of leaning into the discomfort and growth that could come from real accountability, they dodge it completely. And they do that by turning you into the problem, and it's not always obvious. Sometimes it looks like charm, like intellectualizing, like philosophical conversations about how everyone's truth is different. And it's all about perception. It sounds elevated, evolved, but really it's a way to avoid the simple truth. They hurt you, and they don't want to feel bad about it. So instead of acknowledging that truth, they build a story where you were overbearing, or you were cold, or you triggered them, anything that lets them off the hook, anything that keeps them in the clear, and they'll tell that story to themselves, to their friends, maybe even to you. And if you're not grounded in your own reality, it can start to work. That's why boundaries are so important in these situations. Not just physical boundaries, but emotional and cognitive ones. Because if you're not careful, you'll find yourself living in a version of the story where your own pain has been edited out. When someone truly cares about you, your pain matters to them even when they're the one who caused it, especially when they're the one who caused it. That's what accountability looks like. That's what connection looks like. But for a narcissist, admitting fault isn't just uncomfortable, it's unbearable because it threatens the false self they've worked so hard to protect. So they don't say, I hurt you. They say, you're too sensitive. They don't ask, how can I fix this? They say, I guess nothing I do is ever good enough. See the switch. It's subtle, but it's deliberate. It moves the focus off your experience and back onto theirs. It recenters them. And over time, if you keep engaging from a place of empathy without receiving any in return, you start to shrink. You start to silence yourself before they can. You start to filter your truth through what they'll be able to handle. And that's when you know the story has become too twisted to stay inside of. You cannot grow in a place where your pain is always rewritten. After a narcissist hurts you, they're not sitting with remorse or thinking, how do I make this right? They're watching you, not with empathy, but with strategy. They're not emotionally connecting with your pain. They're studying your reaction because in their mind, it's not really about what they did. It's about how much control they still have over you now that you've been hurt. It's subtle, but it's chilling. You think you're expressing genuine emotion, crying, pulling away, or maybe even calling them out. And you believe they'll see this, they'll hear me, this will land, but for them it's a data point. It's not, she's hurting, it's she's still invested. Not, he's withdrawing because he needs space, but he's being difficult. How do I pull him back in? You are no longer a person in pain. You are a situation to be managed. A variable to assess. A challenge to solve not out of love, but out of ego. And what's hard to swallow is that when a narcissist evaluates your reaction, they're not asking, what do they need from me right now? They're asking, can I still shape this? Can I still steer it back toward what I want? If you're still engaging, even if you're upset, even if you're furious, it tells them they're not fully cut off. You haven't shut the door. And to a narcissist, any access is power. So what happens next is often the part that really messes with our heads, because they'll suddenly show interest. They might say something kind or even offer an apology. Not because they mean it, but because they sense you pulling away. And to them, your distance isn't about your pain. It's about their risk of losing you as a source of validation, admiration, or control. So they start acting, not feeling acting. They may become gentle, thoughtful, say things like, I didn't mean to hurt you, or I've just been under a lot of stress. It sounds reasonable. It feels like progress. But it's not rooted in a desire to grow, it's rooted in the fear of losing their influence. They're testing, can I still access their heart? Can I still get them to drop the boundary, question themselves, come back to me? It's an emotional bait. And switch. And if you take that bait, if you soften, if you respond, if you lean in with the hope that this time it's different, they've confirmed their suspicion. You're still in it. You're still reachable. And not only that, but now they know exactly what strings to pull next time. Because you just taught them something, what it takes to keep you tethered. And this is where it gets dangerous. Not always in a dramatic, obvious way, but in a slow erosion of your emotional boundaries. Because if you keep responding, if you keep offering access every time they suddenly shift into charm or fake concern, they learn to rely on the pattern. They can hurt you, watch you react, wait it out, then swoop in with just enough effort to keep you questioning yourself. And over time, that cycle doesn't just keep you close, it keeps you small. It keeps you in a space where you're constantly adjusting your own behavior, trying to manage their mood, trying to earn what should have been basic respect from the start. And here's the hard truth. A narcissist doesn't need to love you in order to want to keep you around. They just need to feel like they can. It's about access, not affection. It's about control, not connection. And so when they gauge your reaction, they're not looking for signs of healing. They're looking for signs of leverage. Are you still emotionally reactive? Are you still hoping they'll change? Are you still explaining yourself, defending yourself, showing up in the hope they'll finally get it? Because as long as you are, they know they still matter to you. And to someone with a narcissistic mindset, mattering isn't a sacred connection. It's a tool. It's something they can use to regain control the next time the dynamic slips and they're watching closely. Every move you make after the hurt, whether you stay quiet or lash out, whether you block them or beg for clarity, becomes information they log away, not because they care, but because they're assessing the odds. The odds of getting back into your good graces, the odds of avoiding real accountability, the odds of spinning the story in their favor. That's the game, and what's most confusing is that sometimes their performance in these moments can feel real. They can cry, they can say all the right things, they can seem vulnerable, and if you're someone who leads with empathy, you want to believe it. You need to believe it, because you're not just looking for closure. You're looking for a reason to still believe in them. But that's the trap, because if their behavior changes only when they sense you're slipping away, if their empathy only surfaces when their control is threatened, then it's not growth, it's not healing. It's strategy, and once the threat passes, once they feel secure again, the charm fades, the old patterns return, and you're right back where you started, explaining why something hurt, while they study your face, not to understand, but to see how well their last tactic worked. You deserve to be seen not as a mirror for someone else's ego, but as a whole person whose feelings matter, not just when they serve someone else's narrative, but because they're yours. Sometimes the most confusing part of being hurt by a narcissist is the moment they seem like they care. It can stop you in your tracks. You're bracing for silence or blame or more manipulation. And instead, they say they're sorry, they look sad, they even cry, and you find yourself wondering, wait, maybe this time it's real. Maybe they finally see it, but here's the thing. Narcissists can be incredibly convincing, not because they feel more deeply than others, but because they know exactly what empathy looks like. They know what remorse sounds like. They've learned, sometimes through years of trial and error, how to perform emotion when it serves their needs. And that's what this moment is. It's not vulnerability. It's not growth. It's a performance. When a narcissist sees that you're pulling away, that you're emotionally wounded, that you might be waking up to the dysfunction in the dynamic, you become a flight risk, not a person to care for, but a resource they might lose. And for someone who thrives on control, the idea of losing emotional access to you is threatening. So what do? They mirror what they think you want to see. They mimic the behaviors of someone who's reflecting, someone who's sorry, someone who's been cracked open by the weight of their own actions. It's not rooted in the desire to repair. It's not about understanding the impact they had on you. It's about self-preservation. They're not asking, how do I make things right? They're asking, what do I need to say to get this back under control? And it can feel incredibly real. That's what makes it so hard. You want to believe it because it sounds like the words you've been waiting to hear. You want to believe it because there's something in all of us that hopes people can change, especially the people we've loved. And they know that, they count on that hope. They know how to string together just enough sincerity to keep you on the line. And because you're an empathic person, because you value connection, because you want to believe in people's ability to grow, you start second guessing yourself. You start thinking, maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I didn't give them enough time. Maybe they just didn't know how much they were hurting me until now. But pay attention to what happens after the apology. Watch closely, because here's the test. Does the behavior actually change, not just for a week or two? Not just when they are on thin ice, but over time. Do they stay accountable? Do they stay open to feedback? Do they take ownership the next time they mess up? Or does the cycle start again? Because if it's a performance, the cracks will show quickly. The remorse will vanish as soon as they feel like the threat of losing you is gone. The tenderness will dry up the moment they feel secure again. And when it does, you'll feel that familiar sinking feeling in your chest. That sense of confusion, of déjà vu, of how did we get back here again? And that's the difference between real change and emotional manipulation. Real change takes consistency. It takes discomfort. It takes humility. A narcissist doesn't want any of those things. They don't want to stay in the hard, messy work of repair. They want to skip to the part where you're back under control, back in the role they prefer you in, forgiving, flexible, questioning your own boundaries, grateful for breadcrumbs. And let's be honest, it's easier in some ways to believe the performance. Because the alternative is painful. The alternative means accepting that this person may not actually care in the way you hoped they did, that they're not invested in the relationship, they are invested in the appearance of connection. That's a hard truth. It's not just a loss of trust. It's a loss of the version of them you thought was real, but clarity is powerful. When you stop focusing on the words and start focusing on the patterns, everything changes. You start to see that those moments of caring were often followed by more harm, more manipulation, more withdrawal. You start to realize that genuine empathy doesn't come and go depending on how threatened someone feels. It stays. It shows up when it's uncomfortable. It holds space for your feelings even when it's not convenient. And this is where the shift happens. Not in them, but in you. You stop mistaking performance for progress. You stop giving weight to empty apologies. You stop handing out second chances like candy, hoping this time it sticks. You start asking yourself, do their actions line up with their words? Do they truly respect my boundaries? Do they show care when there's nothing in it for them? Because the answer to those questions will tell you far more than any carefully crafted apology ever will. There's something deeply disorienting about realizing that your pain isn't being seen. Not really. And when you're dealing with a narcissist, that lack of empathy doesn't always come as silence. Sometimes it comes as a reaction so centered on them that you start to question whether they even saw you in the first place. Because when they hurt you, they don't ask, "Are you okay?" or "How can I repair this?" What they think, almost instinctively, is, "What does this mean for me?" It's hard to explain that kind of self-absorption unless you've been on the receiving end of it. It's not just selfishness, it's a full emotional redirection. Your pain becomes a stage for their discomfort. Your reaction becomes a mirror they can't tolerate looking into, so instead they shatter it and focus on the broken pieces. Suddenly, the hurtful thing they did isn't the focus anymore. Now it's your tone, your attitude, your overreaction. It becomes about how they feel, how misunderstood they are, how hard it is for them to be constantly judged. And you're left there, holding your truth in your hands, wondering how it somehow got turned into a weapon against them. Because what they really fear isn't that they hurt you. It's that you'll stop believing in their version of who they are. That you'll step out of the story where they're the good one, the misunderstood one, the one who never meant any harm. Your pain threatens that narrative, and for a narcissist, protecting their self-image takes precedence over almost anything else, including connection, honesty, and even love. So they go inward, but not in the way healthy people do, not with curiosity, not with a desire to grow. They retreat into themselves to escape accountability. They tell themselves you were too much, you were unfair. You're not seeing the full picture. And they build this internal fortress to shield themselves from the shame they refuse to name. They'd rather believe a distorted truth than sit in the vulnerability of, "I caused harm and I need to own it." And the reason that matters, the reason it hurts so much, is because when you care about someone, you want to be seen, you want to be held with care, you want your pain to matter, not just as an inconvenience or a threat, but as something that calls someone you love to show up better. And when that doesn't happen, when they respond by making your pain about them, it leaves a scar. It teaches you that your feelings are too heavy, too inconvenient, too much. That's the silent message a narcissist sends after they hurt you. Your pain is only valid if I say it is. And that's where the erosion begins. You start to filter your emotions before you even share them. You downplay your needs. You sugarcoat your boundaries. Because you've learned that telling the truth about how something made you feel doesn't get you comfort or closeness. It gets you defensiveness or worse, distance. You begin to carry their discomfort as if it's your responsibility to manage. You apologize when you're the one who's hurt. You comfort them because your pain made them feel bad, and it doesn't seem obvious at first, but slowly, quietly, you disappear from your own experience. You become more focused on how to keep the peace, how to preserve the relationship, how to keep them from retreating or lashing out. And all the while, the original wound goes untreated. That's the toll it takes. Not just on your sense of safety, but on your sense of self. Because when your emotional reality is constantly met with self-centered responses, you start to doubt it. You start to ask, was it really that bad? Am I being too sensitive? Did I bring this on myself? And that's exactly what keeps you in the cycle. Because now, not only are you hurting, but you're also questioning whether you even deserve to feel that way. This is what makes healing from this kind of dynamic so complex. It's not just about getting over what happened. It's about untangling yourself from the internalized message that your pain is negotiable, that your needs require justification, that your feelings are a problem to be managed instead of a truth to be honored. And let me say this clearly, your pain is not too much. Your reaction is not the problem. The problem is that you were hurt, and the person who caused it refused to see you. They made your injury about their image. They prioritized their comfort over your healing, and that's not empathy. That's emotional abandonment wrapped in self-protection. You cannot teach someone to care. You can't love them into accountability, and you should never have to hand over your own voice just to be allowed to stay in the room. There's this moment, usually quiet, often lonely, when the reality of the narcissist's impact finally settles in. Not just the hurtful thing they said or did, but the pattern behind it, the consistent refusal to take responsibility, the subtle twisting of your words, the way they always seem to make your feelings feel like a threat to them instead of something to care about. And in that moment, you're not just grieving what they did. You're grieving the idea that they never truly saw you, not the real you, not the parts of you that were vulnerable, trusting, open, and even more than that. You're grieving the fact that you spent so long hoping they would. And what makes this so complicated is that narcissists are not one-dimensional villains. They can be funny, they can be charming, they can be brilliant and magnetic and full of potential. That's part of what draws us in and makes us stay. It's what keeps us hoping that maybe they just need a little more time, a little more understanding, that if you can just be patient enough or loving enough or forgiving enough, they'll finally get it. They'll finally step up and meet you where you are. But here's the truth. Someone who is unwilling to look at how they hurt you is someone who cannot love you in the way you deserve. Not because they are incapable of love altogether, but because they are too committed to protecting their own ego to ever fully open themselves up to the kind of connection that requires accountability. For them, love is often a transaction. It's not how can I be better for you. It's what can I get from you without having to change who I am. And when you begin to pull away, when you finally stop explaining yourself, stop trying to fix it, stop chasing their validation, that's when something interesting happens. That's when they start to feel your absence in a way they can't control. Because you're no longer feeding the dynamic, you're no longer playing the role they assigned to you, you're no longer dancing around their discomfort just to keep the peace. And make no mistake, your silence, your boundary, your detachment, it unsettles them. But not in the way you might hope, Not in a what have I done kind of way, more like why aren't they giving me what I need anymore. To a narcissist, your healing looks like betrayal. Your strength looks like defiance. Your growth looks like abandonment because they don't see it through the lens of what you're going through. They see it through the lens of what they're losing. They don't sit in that space and reflect on how they could show up differently. Instead, they may try to pull you back in. They might reach out, offer some shallow apology, or suddenly act like they're ready to talk, just enough to test if the door is still open. But here's what you need to know: that reach isn't about you. It's about control, it's about comfort, it's about restoring their access to the thing they feel slipping away, not because they're ready to do the work, but because they hate feeling powerless. And that's why reclaiming your peace feels so radical in these situations. Because you're choosing truth over illusion. You're choosing self-respect over potential. You're choosing the hard road of healing over the easier road of staying tangled in a story that only ever gave you crumbs of connection. You begin to see it, all the ways you made yourself smaller just to keep things calm, all the ways you ignored your intuition just to give them the benefit of the doubt, all the ways you tried to earn care that should have been freely given. And that realization, it's painful, but it's also freeing, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you name it, you can begin to unlearn it, and that's when the real healing begins, not when they finally change. Not when they come back with the apology you always hoped for, but when you stop needing that apology to validate your experience. When you know, deep in your bones, that what happened was real, even if they never acknowledge it. That your pain was real, even if they rewrite it. That your worth was never dependent on their ability to recognize it. You start to rebuild, slowly, tenderly. You learn how to trust yourself again. How to feel without censoring, how to speak without shrinking, how to love without losing yourself in the process. You start to understand that closure was never about their explanation. It was about you returning to yourself. Because the truth is, the person who hurt you may never understand what they did. They may never take accountability. They may never see the depth of the damage, but that doesn't make your experience any less true. And it sure as hell doesn't make your healing any less possible. You do not need their permission to move on.